2004 in Boston, when John Kerry picked State Senator Barack Obama to be the keynote speaker, Barack picked me to introduce him. And you all remember that introduction? Wasn't it great? All the time. Come to the website, you get your own time. And so I went backstage before the speech, and there was Barack and Michelle. Now, he was really, really nervous. And I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, how you doing, buddy?" He said, "Man, keynote speaker at the Democratic National Convention. They wouldn't even let me in the last convention in Los Angeles. This is amazing. And I'm a little bit nervous." And he says, "And I just don't think this speech is quite up to it." And I said, "Listen, Barack, you're my friend. I've stood with you through every campaign. When you get elected to the United States Senate, we are going to be colleagues in the Senate. And so, to show my friendship, take my speech." Didn't he do a great job? Amazing. Right there. Changed a few things, He changed the part about the Irish Lithuanian to born in Kenya. All that sort of stuff. So November, after he was elected, in November of 2007, I was in a place called the Union League Club in downtown Chicago, and Barack and I had given a little speech, and this part's true. And it's Friday night, and it's about 5 o'clock, and we're about to leave, and I said, "I gotta talk to you. Come here." So we grabbed a little room off to the side, and the two of us sat down. And I said, "Barack, you gotta run for president." He said, "I haven't even been in the Senate for 2 years." And I said, "I don't think 10,000 roll call votes make you a United States president. And I think you got something, buddy. I don't know if you can win, but you'll bring something to this race, and you'll bring people into the Democratic Party and into this campaign that might not get in." And then he asked me a very important question, which you all appreciate, Terry. He said, "What about Hillary?" I said, "That's a very good question. She is the best. She and, of course, the president have been such good friends to the Democratic Party across America, and it would be a heck of a race. There's no question about it. But I can't see how you can lose, even if you lose, at this point in your career. I really think you ought to consider it." So he said, "I better talk to Michelle." I said, "That's a good idea." So a couple of weeks pass, and I'm at a dinner in Chicago, and there they are. And Michelle says, "Come here. Are you serious?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, we've been talking it over. You're not feeding them to the lions." I said, "No, I wouldn't do that to them." "Well," she said, "the girls are young enough that this might work. They'll remember if there was a swimming pool at the hotel, they won't remember what the New York Times editorial said. So maybe this will work." So I knew she was thinking about it. Just to give a little gentle nudge, I publicly endorsed Barack Obama for President of the United States. So I was the first senator to endorse Barack, and for 12 months I was the only senator. And every time I look over my shoulder for my colleagues, they were all announcing for president. But regardless, I want to say a word about Barack's success, and I want to give acknowledgement to your former governor, Tim Kaine, the first elected official outside of Illinois to endorse Barack Obama. Nobody worked harder than the Democrats in Northern Virginia and Fairfax to put Barack Obama in the White House. And I'm happy. I can recall election night. You can too, I'm sure. Many of you are right there, maybe in this room. Somebody said you were in this room, right? It was announced that Virginia had cast its 13 electoral votes for Barack Obama, the first time since Lyndon Baines Johnson carried Virginia that this state had supported a Democrat for president. It was at that moment when Virginia was announced that CNN declared Barack Obama the next president of the United States. Amazing story in history. When you just think about it for a moment, that the home of the capital of the Confederacy clinched the election for America's first African-American president. We made it happen. All across the world. And I tell you, nobody likes to lose, but America didn't lose when Hillary Clinton gave up her senator spot to become our great Secretary of State. or so in this Congress some amazing achievements that we can point to. The first bill that President Barack Obama signed into law in the White House, I was honored to be there in the back row and see it done. He signed the Lilly Ledbetter Paycheck Fairness bill. Lilly Ledbetter was right there alongside him. Remember the story? There she was in Alabama, working in a tire plant, manufacturing tires, and was in the management ranks and didn't learn until 15 years, as she was about to retire, when someone confided in her she had been doing the same job as the men she was working with and being paid less all of her work career. She took this, obviously, this injustice to the Supreme Court, and they threw it out in a decision which is hard to imagine after all the precedent before it. They said she didn't have standing to protest this discrimination in the workplace because she took too long to report it. We know better. We know that in most workplaces they don't publish how much they're paying to every employee. So you could be a victim of discrimination and not realize it. Well, this Supreme Court, these strict constructionist, conservative justices, decided to toss Lilly Ledbetter out. And when we said we were going to change the law in Congress, President George W. Bush said, if you do, I'll veto it. We waited for another president, and we got that president, and we passed that law, and now workplace fairness is part of American workplace fairness. You remember the Recovery Act, Recovery and Reinvestment. Who could forget that? The worst recession in American history in 80 years, $17 trillion yanked out of our economy, $17 trillion being more than the total of the value of all the goods and services produced in America in a year, that much yanked out of our economy. We all felt it. Saw it in your savings account, saw it in your retirement. Noticed when the business down the block was laying off people and maybe went out of business. You looked around and found 8 million Americans losing their job. You saw homes being foreclosed. That was the legacy of George W. Bush's economic policies. And in came President Barack Obama, and the month that he was sworn into office, 700,000 Americans lost their jobs. In the time between his election and that swearing in, the end of that month, 1.5 million Americans had lost their jobs. That was what the president inherited. Do you remember what George W. Bush inherited from Bill Clinton? He inherited a surplus in the federal budget. He inherited the strongest economy in modern history in America, the creation of jobs and businesses and home ownership at a record high. He inherited a national debt that had been accumulated through the course of American history from George Washington through William Jefferson Clinton of $5 trillion. And when George W. Bush went out the door, he left the economy in shambles and a national debt of $12 trillion. This fiscally conservative Republican president more than doubled the debt of America in 8 years. How can you pull that off? Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you have 2 wars and you don't pay for them. Then you've got to make sure you do something no American president has ever done, cut taxes in the midst of a war for the wealthiest people. Put that all together with some rotten economic policies and you can more than double the national debt. George W. Bush proved it. And he left that mess in the lap of President Barack Obama. The president turned to us in Congress and said, we're not going to stand by and watch the American economy crater. We're going to start working to get this country back on its feet. He turned to Jim and Jerry and the members of Congress and said, we need to work together. Here's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is cut taxes. Democrats, cut taxes on working families across America. 95% of them will get a tax cut. The second thing we're going to do, we're going to create a real safety net for the people who lost their jobs. We're going to make sure they have unemployment benefits, and we're going to help pay for their health insurance, because how in the world are you going to survive if you lost your job and your health insurance? And then he said, we're going to invest money in rebuilding America in Virginia, in Illinois, in California, all